think like it's really this Western mentality that is always worried about the future or the past. And so we forget to be in the present. And that's why we forget to breathe, right? Because in a way, breathing happens in the now. But if you're not in the now, you also forget to breathe. You forget your body because you're just somewhere, but you're never really here. And so that's my number one advice, is like to take your time to be here and really feel.
Hi everyone. Today we will have a conversation with Christina Hottinger, the inspiring founder of Yoga Lab in Zurich. Christina discovered yoga while studying psychology in Holland, which helped her to calm her mind and develop better awareness of her body. She graduated in 2018 in London with a degree in yoga therapy with a focus on neurology and clinical psychology. Her classes are inspired by classical hatha and vinyasa and also explain the effects of yoga on the brain, body, and nervous system.
So I was studying in Holland, as you just said. And then back then I developed kind of a depression and a bit of anxiety. And then I discovered yoga at the same time. It was kind of like overlapping. And then once I started yoga, I started to feel really grounded and calmer. And I could really feel that shift from this kind of like nervous person and like always worrying to feel much more grounded and here and confident. And I remember because I then took a course in clinical psychology, and I was thinking that, yoga would really help people with anxiety or depression, or I think like it helps actually with a lot of like mental problems. But back then there was just nothing out there. Everything was about mindfulness meditation. That's kind of like what the neurological field was looking at. It was like mindfulness meditation and its effect on the brain. But there was very little research being done on yoga and its effect on the brain. And then when I finished studying in Holland, it was like a year or like 2 years later that I found my course in England. And there the focus was really on clinical psychology and mental health and yoga. And so what I always find is really important in my work is that people understand what is happening to them and why things are happening. And I think like that sounds maybe like a little bit funny, but I always feel like yoga has these two aspects, like it's kind of like there is a spiritual component. There is like almost a magic to it in my view. But then there's also this very physical aspect to it, like how does a breathing technique or how does a certain posture affect the physical body, both the brain, the hormones that we develop, and also like the body itself, right? And so that's a lot of what I'm doing in my classes. It's just that I include that knowledge and I give that to people so that they know what they're doing and why it's helping them. So it's not this great mystery, but like people understand, like, oh yeah, if I breathe like this is why I'm coming down. Or if I do this and this exercise, that's why it helps me on my body. And so that's like, to me, is a big part. It's like just to make people understand that's what we're doing.
I think that's so fascinating how important the physical aspect is, that people realize and make that connection. Because often if we're struggling with something, we do talk about it with our friends and our family, but that can only get us so far. Sometimes we really need to calm down the tension that has been building up in the body to help us release those emotions. And I just think it's such a fascinating combination, yoga and neuroscience.
Like yoga was really invented by very, very smart people thousands of years ago. And they really, like the old yogis really understood the body. They understood that like certain sounds have an effect on our system. They understood that postures and breathing, all of these things, that they have a beneficial aspect and that they help us, like the physical body. And I think like now what we're doing is we're just kind of like proving them right. So like now that we understand like how to look at the brain, we're like, hey, yeah, like they were actually right. They already knew that like thousands of years ago, but now we can just see and be like, okay, it does have an effect on the brain and it does activate this and this part within the brain, or it does affect the endocrine system. And I think like it just is really nice because neuroscience in itself is very young as a field, as a scientific field. It's not very old, and we're still struggling to go to the deeper part of the brain to actually see what's going on and to measure all of what's going on. It's still not yet all figured out. And so I think that's why it took so long. But now I love this emergence between science and yoga. I think it's just fabulous. Like once you start reading about it, you never want to read anything else. It's just beautiful. And I always felt like Harry Potter in Hogwarts. To me, it was like magic, you know. And this to sound maybe weird, but like, you know, you start to understand how these things work, and like you understand how beautiful the practice is and how profoundly it can literally change your whole body, your brain, and your whole existence in that way. And it always felt like, you know, the breath work is like a spell, and then the movement is like a magic potion, because it's not much different if you think about it. There's like also these kind of tools that you have to then make that shift. And so that's how it always felt to me. And then of course, like, you know, talking about neuroscience and anatomy is in itself just such a beautiful system, right? Like our brain is a beautiful system, like the whole like skeleton, the way we're built. And I feel like I'm sounding a bit hyper every time I talk about these things, but it's just once you really start looking at it, you're like, wow, it's an incredible miracle that we're actually existing and the way we exist. And so it gives you also this gratitude, right? It's not just like, oh, it's just my body and my body is this and this and this. No, it's like something, it's a system that had to be built out of 2 cells. And now you're here and you can move and you're able to stretch and to heal. And that to me is, yeah, it's magical.
It's all connected. And how amazing that you've been able to make that into your job, your everyday job, where in a time that most of us are sitting at a desk, you know, 8 hours a day, and all of those things that you said are so important, like posture, like mindfully breathing and not just breathing automatically, and really noticing your body and grounding yourself. These things are inching further and further away with all of these hours at a desk. So I know a lot of people think, oh, I don't have time to do yoga, or I wouldn't be able to do it often enough that it would help. So I wanted to ask you, how often would you recommend doing a yoga practice to really notice those positive changes that you were talking about?
It's so like, you know, it's funny because people always ask me this question. Like usually when it comes to forward folds, you know, like people, I don't know, a lot of us struggle in forward folds, and everyone's like, okay, like how long do I need to do it? And I was like, well, if you never do it, it takes a really long time. If you do it every day for like 30 seconds, you will have it within a week or 2. And I think I heard this really like lovely sentence once by a friend of mine. It's like, you know, my plan is to do yoga for a minute a day. And then I was like, what do you mean a minute? And it's like, yeah, because if you plan on a minute, everyone has a minute. Usually you do more and it develops out of this minute, but you can do a minute, right? You can just like sit down and breathe consciously for a minute. And that's already like, you did already something good for yourself. Whereas like a lot of times, you know, people are like, oh my God, I have to do 45 minutes of yoga or like 90 minutes. And that just is so daunting, especially if you have so much else on your plate that a lot of times then we don't even start. So to me, I rather have a person taking like a minute or 5 to just breathe, or, you know, like once in a while, like do like a nice stretch and then like release again, like something like this, rather than having this massive plan and then just not go through it. And as you said before, like the breathing, the problem with us sitting at the desk all the time, and I'll show this a bit from the side, it's not just that it's just horrible for our posture. It's also like if we sit like this, and you can do it like if you do it yourself, like you can feel you have no space to breathe because your diaphragm cannot expand, and then your lungs have no space to open up, right? And so a lot of time when we're in this posture, there's a lot of tension on our neck and we just don't breathe. And especially if you're stressed or really concentrated, have you ever noticed that you just forget to breathe and you just don't breathe for like, I don't know, like a few seconds, but it's quite a long time. So for me, that's always a big thing, right? Is really opening up the upper body, releasing the shoulders and just sitting up straight and giving our body even the space to be able to breathe. And it's a real issue, you know, if you don't breathe properly, you don't have enough oxygen within your blood, and we're not exhaling enough toxins and carbon dioxide. So that's why like this sedentary lifestyle is actually now considered even more toxic than smoking. And it really is just us being seated all the day long. So if you like, I don't know whether that answered your question, but like, if you have like just a minute to breathe and breathe deeply, really taking a deep breath and then exhaling that, you've already kind of like reset your system a little bit.
That's such a powerful concept. Just 1 minute a day, you know, anyone can do that. You could even do 1 minute an hour, and that could just be breathing. And not only is that already helping you, but you're actually setting a habit that you will probably continue doing.
And you know, and the funny thing is, like, even that minute is sometimes hard to achieve, right? So you have to find, I feel like you have to find tools, like make yourself a post-it on your computer, like, am I still breathing? Or get an app. There are apps that, you know, like pop up in the middle of like an email and they're like, okay, you need to take deep breaths. I think like Apple Watch also does it. And it's just, we have to kind of find mechanisms to remind us. And, you know, like also now that the weather is nice, like take 5 minutes to just stand in front of an open window and let the sun come in and really feel and just be present. Because I think that's the other problem that we have. And I am no exception in that, is that we're always like thinking. And usually like our, especially Western minds, I think like it's really this Western mentality that is always worried about the future or the past. And so we forget to be in the present. And that's why we forget to breathe, right? Because in a way, breathing happens in the now. But if you're not in the now, you also forget to breathe. You forget your body because you're just somewhere, but you're never really here. And so that's my number one advice, is like to take your time to be here and really feel. And that's also in my way, or like my experience, one of the best ways to get out of this like monkey mind, or like, you know, this anxious mind where like, oh my God, this is, you know, how we're spiraling. And then when you come back into the here and now, you can just tell yourself a little story, like, I'm sitting at a desk, I'm looking at my computer, I'm seeing a little red book on the desk. It's like really simple. And in the beginning, it feels a bit funny, but that's the way to calm down your brain. That's the easiest, fastest way to breathe and then notice what is happening now. I like to have my students close their eyes during class. Like, it's not a must, but I find that like when you teach a class and students close their eyes, it's just way easier to really feel. And you're coming out of that thinking mode into this being mode. And yeah, and then I feel like once you have your eyes closed and you just really listen to your body, it becomes this meditation in motion. Right, and you're coming into a different state, in this flow state. It takes a little bit because our head is so used to being like the runner of the show all the time that it doesn't like to give over the steering wheel to the body. But there is also this wisdom within our body, right? And that's what you said before, like there's all this tension within our body because it's also stored. And so if we're very stressed, this does store within the body and it needs release. And I think that's what you said before. Talking alone does not necessarily release. You have to include the body. It's just as important. And I feel like sometimes, like, you know, in our Western world, we deny that. We deny that reality because everything is just about the head. But the body is just as important.
It makes a lot of sense. I know a lot of people at the moment are struggling with stress and with tension and also anxiety. Probably also due to lack of movement, you know, being stuck being stuck working from home. What would you recommend? How can people at home use yoga or yoga techniques to help ease that feeling of stress or even a feeling of burnout?
Yeah, you know, it's an interesting question because I'm not just a yoga teacher, I'm also a mother. And I think like some of your viewers might feel that way as well. Like it can happen. It can really sneak up on you. Like it's something that I've been thinking about since we focused on the burnout. Like it can really sneak up on you. And I think a really important step is just to be like, okay, kind of like a very honest assessment. Like, how am I doing? And if you're not doing well, really also be honest and be like, okay, I am not doing so well. And then be like, what do I need? Like, what are methods that I can use to calm down? And I think with yoga, what you can do is like really work on the breathing. If you like, I can also show you like a few breath exercises that you can do just at the desk. And then the other thing is really like, you know, if you remember your posture. So your posture has this influence on your mood. Like if you sit like this, do I look like I know what I'm saying? Like, do I look to you like, okay, this girl like knows what she's talking about? No, right? And I can't even speak loud. Like, you can hear me because I have a microphone, but it's not really powerful. And so this posture, biologically seen or historically seen, it's a posture of surrendering, right? It's not a posture of this is the leader of the pack. So in this posture, we're like, oh, we're protecting all our vital organs. But since we're always sitting like this, and we don't do this because we're surrendering, we're just slouching. We don't have that space. And then, like here, there's so much pressure. So as I said before, like your lungs cannot expand, your digestive system doesn't really work because it has no space. And then if you start to move up and you're rolling your shoulders back and you're taking a bit of space, immediately we'll feel a shift. And see like how I also, I sound different, right? Like I have space to actually create power. I cannot do it like this. This is not a powerful pose. This is a Netflix pose. Like I'm watching my favorite show for 3 hours in a row. Whereas this is like, okay, I'm taking ownership over the moment. And this is a really big part. And then, yoga, it can help you starting release your shoulders and your neck. It can help you expand. So a lot of practices that we do in yoga is also about expanding. And we're looking right now in neuroscience also on this effect, right? Of like what effect has this expansion of your body on your brain? And there is this idea of power posture, like if we're like this, or like, how guys always sit like with their legs like far out. It's they're taking up space, and it has an effect on how we feel and also how we're perceived. And it's a little bit like chicken and egg, which one happens first? But you will see, like just by sitting upright, you already feel different. If you stand, if you don't stand like this, or if you stand like this, it really has an effect. And then and that's why, like for example, strong core muscles are important, because sitting upright takes a lot of strength from your back and your core. Like when I started with yoga, I could not sit straight for more than a minute, and then my whole back would start to hurt. And I remember like we did the yoga teacher training, we're like, are these people crazy? They're expecting me to sit for an hour on the floor? Whereas now this is just like normal, like this is how I feel comfortable. But it requires strength. And I don't know, like maybe I repeated that already before, but like part of the posture is like having a strong core is correlating with feeling stronger mentally. There's a very strong connection between your core muscles and how you're feeling mentally. And that's why this posture, again, it's just like, it's the most poisonous posture we could have invented, to sit like for 13 hours a day.
So at home, if we're feeling stressed, open up the shoulders, breathing deeply, creating space.
If you have a lot of tension in your shoulders, imagine you're taking off your shirt and you just do a few of these rolls. And then, like when you're seated at home, like you could also do like a twist in your chair. It's just like you give your spine a different movement. So you have that spinal health coming back in. And yes, expand as much as you can. That is really like a big thing, is like expanding, like stretching out, like, moving your fingers, just creating, space. Space is very important. And again, like, I know this, I don't want to sound like a feminist, but women, we're always like used to not taking up space. Men are much better at taking up space. But like as a woman also, like expand as far out as you can, creating that circle like of space, just your space, right? Not someone else's space.
Would you say because of that are women more susceptible to high stress or burnout feelings?
So like what we know from science is that women are more susceptible to depression. And one of the reasons I think, like, I mean, like obviously like in our culture, right, we're always like, we're supposed to sit like this, like you can't literally make yourself any smaller. Whereas like guys just sit like this all the time. So they naturally make themselves bigger. And they're used to taking up space. But women also, like an issue for women is that we always internalize everything. So like as an example, like if you have an exam and you did not do well on your exam, like guys are like, oh, it's unfair, like I'm sorry, but like this professor was just crazy. Whereas women are like, oh my God, I should have studied more, I should have just worked harder. So like, it's a lot healthier to blame it on someone else in that regard than always blame everything on yourself. And so that's where you have to come back and be like very honest and be like, okay, how am I doing? Like, am I taking space? Am I Am I doing something for me, not for anybody else? And am I breathing? Am I taking care of my body? Am I taking care of my resting, of my sleep? So yeah, I think like women, they tend to be more anxious. I think I don't say like men are not stressed or they don't have depression. It just kind of also manifests itself maybe differently. But I think this always internalizing feeling of like it's our fault or it's our responsibility, it does not necessarily help to make you feel more relaxed. Let's say like this.
So not only people working at home office, but there's some people who are still going to work every day, are in a high stress or high pressure environment that is maybe at the moment even more so depending on the branch that they're working in. So what would your recommendations be for people working in these kinds of toxic environments that might be more susceptible to burnout? How could they incorporate maybe some yoga or some other practices into their day-to-day life to help them to stay resilient?
Trying to get rid of that cortisol, right? Like you want to get that stress out of your system. And so really moving as much as you can, maybe go for a run in the evening. And the posture part is very important. And again, like finding your center and, you know, taking a time, like if everything becomes too much, if you feel like there is like demands from everywhere, we tend to come into this fight or flight mode, right? Where we just want to react. We come into this reactive mode. And in that mode, we're actually getting more stressed and we think less. And so a really big part is just to take a deep breath in and exhaling out. Grounding yourself again, maybe really have your feet on the floor, feeling like, where are you now? And just take a minute or two to just breathe. Close your eyes, breathe, come back to the here and now. And then from there, start going. So rather than just reacting to everything that comes into you and it feels like you just have to react, you can never act. You're just reacting to stimuli that come from the outside world. You're starting to take ownership again over the moment by just taking your time, you breathe, and then you set out from there. Try a yoga nidra. And yoga nidra is a beautiful meditation you can do before going to bed, even if you fall asleep while listening to it. And it's a beautiful meditation to scan your body. And it has shown to improve mood and concentration. It has reduced inflammation. So kind of meditation can really help to just come out of this reactive mode into a here mode. And then all of these practices will just help you calm down and come out of this fight or flight response. That's the most important part, that you don't feel like you always have to, you're always under threat, right? Because that's what's happening if we are in these environments. We feel like we're threatened. And our body doesn't understand the difference, whether there's a tiger or there's a massive backlog on emails. Like our brain reacts the same way. The problem is like that we come into this loop of releasing cortisol all over, like all the time. And I don't know, like for everyone who feels like really stressed, you might have noticed that you're sleeping less or you cannot remember things, like that you feel like more forgetful. And the problem is like if we're always in this high alert mode, then we always create cortisol, because our brain is always like literally ringing the alarm bells. And cortisol is here to make us run or fight. And then what it does, it literally breaks down the circuits on the brain. Like it breaks down, it affects our hippocampus. And our hippocampus, for example, is also involved in creating memory. So if you're super stressed, then you cannot store your memories. And that's why you feel like you're really forgetful. And that's the problem, right? Like, and also the problem with this pandemic, because it's been for so long, so that our stress levels have been high for such a long time that at one point, like we lose our ability to downregulate. But then once you start like breathing and you start yoga practices and meditation, you're getting that ability back. So it's not something that is lost forever. It's just you need to find, again, tools to help that inner system to regulate yourself.
And there was a great study tip in there as well, Changemakers, if you are listening well. During exam time, you have to take a break and calm down, and that will actually help you to remember what you're studying.
When I was in school, and you maybe had the same thing, that before an exam, you could feel like how you get nervous and like your heart was like starting to pump, and you're like, but I know the stuff, like why am I nervous? And I was thinking, like, I remember it so clearly. I was like, I wish there was like a switch that I could switch off, and so I wouldn't feel nervous. And that switch actually exists, and it's just like breathing. So like, you know, what our teacher always did, like she let us sing a few ohms, because when you like right, you're exhaling for a really long time. So the moment you start to take these deep breaths and you're starting to exhale longer than you're inhaling, you're coming back into the parasympathetic nervous system, where you're calm and relaxed. So that's what I meant with like, you need to have your tools so that you can calm down, and then you can switch out of this like everything is dangerous to, okay, let's do one thing at a time. In our head, everything is huge, and all our thoughts are true. But our brain is basically just an echo chamber, and it just repeats things it has heard 1,000 times before. You know, sometimes in my classes, I tell people like, fake it till you make it when it comes to the brain. So like, if your thought is always like, oh my God, I'm not good enough, or I can't do this, or, you know, whatever your patterns are, it's just, you hear them when you're stressed because your brain has said them so many times, and it seems to kind of like hit a nerve with you. So it gives you that again. And then if you start to think like different, and you're like, okay, thank you for that thought, but that no longer serves me. And you're starting to just think, even if it feels funny, even if it doesn't feel true, you're just gonna repeat like, I can do this. I am calm. I am grounded. I am capable. I have the resources. Whatever your mantra becomes, you're starting to rewrite these patterns within your brain. And, you know, your brain has to hear it a few thousand times, and then it's like, okay, sounds like the truth. And that's just what our brain does. And that's why, like, you know, learn about your thought process and thought patterns, and see what you need to adjust.
That's why human interaction is so important, because it gives us the perspective that we say, oh, you know, this is the case, and someone else says, no, I don't see that way at all. And you really get that, oh, okay, so am I right, or is someone else right, or maybe there's something in the middle. But it makes us reevaluate these things that we've been saying to ourselves for so long that actually might not be the truth. So it's so important to be positive with yourself and be accepting of yourself. We always say, you know, treat others as you would like to be treated. But I think it's also very important to say, actually treat yourself as you would like to be treated, and become aware of how you're treating yourself, and what kind of tone you're taking with yourself within your thoughts. You know, that voice that's always in the back of your mind. What tone is that person taking?
We're not very nice to ourselves. I'm like, if we would talk to other people the way we would talk to ourselves, we're like, whoa, we would not have any friends most of the time. You know, I do this sometimes in my classes where, for example, like you're holding a plank, and, you know, like most of the time when you're in a plank, you're like, oh my God, it's really hard. I wonder when it's going to end, right? Like this is kind of the thought process that we have. And so I let people say like, I am strong out loud. I am strong. I am strong. And I find it really weird. Suddenly you just see everyone adjusting. Suddenly like everyone is in a really beautiful position, and they can hold it so much longer. It's just that their thought process is no longer like, this is hard, which really weighs heavy on you, and to, I am strong. And that's what I mean. Like, even if it feels funny, even if it feels wrong or like not true, once you just start saying it, your body reacts to it. Or like I did this with balancing poses, you know, that you say, I am balanced, I am strong. And suddenly people just stand in a tree. Whereas before they were like swaying from side to side. And it's because, you know, words really have power, and we have values in words, right? Like certain words really mean something and resonate. And so if you always tell yourself like, I'm not good enough, of course, like then you also feel that way. And so that's why it's so important to be kind. And again, you know, I feel like it's always easier to talk about this than to do it. But what helps for me, for example, is to do it in my practice, right? It's like, I am strong. And then like I would do a pose, like, for example, like a warrior one, but with cactus arms. So I'm really having this strength within my arms. Or like I would do it in a plank or in a downward facing dog. And really like, while I'm in these poses that are physically quite challenging, that you're there, you're like, okay, I am strong, I'm confident, I am really like harnessing the power of that pose in that moment. And coming out of this into like a warrior, I always feel like that's really empowering.
Very empowering. Even doing that at work for everyone to see.
yeah, like just go and like, you know, I used to do this at work. Like I actually tested it when I was still in, I was still like doing an internship. And most people, it's really interesting. There's whole studies to this. Like if they go to like a person, like their boss or whatever, like they do this, they have like little folders here and to like, and especially with men, you have to watch it once, like, you know, when you see like politicians, it's really funny. But then once you do this, you know, like you come across also more confident, and it feels more confident than this. So really create space. I think that's what it always comes back to, isn't it? It's creating space, and both physically, mentally, energetically. And that's also to me what yoga does. It gives you space. It also gives you space to be with yourself and to sit with yourself for a while, you know, because I think that's the other thing. We don't like to sit with ourselves. What it really helped with, and I think that's what it helped the most, is kind of like, especially if you're a sensitive or empathetic person, it's very easy to always feel other people's energy and to always like take everyone else into consideration, maybe to the point that you don't know who you are anymore or what you feel. And what it really helped me with yoga is like it really pulled me into my body to really be here and feel like what is that I feel, not everyone else. And I think especially when we're stressed, right? We always like look outside, and yoga really helps you to draw inside. And what you will find, like if you start this practice, is that you're a lot stronger and capable and beautiful than you thought at the beginning. And that there is this wisdom within you, and that everyone has that part that actually is at peace. And it's through this practice that you can connect to that part. And you're coming out of like the thinking mode and into this being mode. And that's where this wisdom is shared. But we cannot do it while we're running. We have to slow down and listen. And I feel like to me, that was like the greatest discovery. Is like, oh, I am stronger than I think. I am more capable than I thought. And all of these thoughts that I had, they're not necessarily true, because when I do it in yoga, I can actually do things that I didn't think I was capable of.
I think that can be intimidating for people to just stop and listen, because they're afraid of what might be there in the nothing. You know, there's no phone, there's no TV, there's no radio. It's just you and your breath, and people are like, oh, but what happens then? What might I hear? What might I realize? But it's actually a beautiful thing. And as you said, it can help us in so many different areas that you wouldn't necessarily think.
It helps you with becoming comfortable with discomfort. And what I mean with that is like so often, like we're in an uncomfortable situation and our brain's like, no, can't do this. Like, let's get out of here. But actually, a lot of times, once you become aware of the present moment, like, it's not that bad. I can do this. I can hold this. And, you know, like studies have really proven that, like, for example, if you're in an intense physical position, it not only strengthens your muscle fibers, it also strengthens your nervous system. So that like the more you do this, the more you're like in kind of like challenging positions, the more, or like the stronger and more resilient your nervous system becomes as well. And that brings us back to then you become more resilient to stress.
It gives us the confidence that we actually did something that we didn't think we could do at the start.
And I have a lot of students, you know, who come here and they start yoga and then suddenly they change their whole lives. They're like realizing like that they're much more capable. They start new studies, or like they go traveling. I mean, not so much now, but like technically, like, right? Or like they started changing their diets, or they're really making big changes because, and that's what I meant with in the beginning, there is also the spiritual aspect that it really just starts to awaken that everyone within us has. And so we start to learn about other aspects of ourselves that we maybe didn't know. And even though they might seem a bit scary in the beginning, it's actually quite an interesting journey. And it's better than staying in a position where we not feel good about ourselves. It's always better to explore.
Absolutely, and having the courage to explore as well. Now, I know you've shown us a couple of breathing positions, but I did want to ask you now, lastly, what are your top maybe 3 favorite yoga practices? Maybe you'd like to explain, or maybe you'd like to show us.
All right. So like, I think one of my favorite things to do is like really the breathing. If you like, I'll show you like 2 breaths. One is Ujjayi breathing, and Ujjayi breathing is kind of like the main breath, or like, yeah, I think like it's for me, it's always the king of breaths, because that's what you are doing also like when you practice, and it's this beautiful way of controlling your breathing. Now remember, I told you, like, if you're exhaling longer than you inhale, you're telling your nervous system that you're safe and it's a time to calm down. And so how to Ujjayi breathing is a bit like you're tightening the throat. And you know, imagine like when you were a kid and you wanted to fog up a mirror and you did to make little smiley faces. That's kind of like what you do. It is like, but then you keep your eyes closed. And then you start to control it. And you can start by just inhaling for 5 seconds, holding it for 2, and then exhaling for 5. And then if you feel confident in that, you're starting to elongate the exhalation. So it sounds like this. So you can hear like this kind of like sound that you're making, and you can see like even when I was doing it, you probably maybe saw probably saw it, like how my posture changes, right? It's not a breath. You cannot do it like this. You cannot inhale like this. It immediately like gives you this length and this space. The other breath is called Dirga breathing, and it's like a 3-part breath. So you're kind of using the Ujjayi breathing again, but this time you're breathing in 3 steps. So what you want to do first is like you're inhaling into your belly, and here it's really important that you're expanding the belly, because especially women, we're kind of like taught from a young age to suck it in, right? And that's not what we do. We're exhaling, like we're inhaling and we're opening the belly so that the diaphragm has space. So you're gonna first inhale into the belly, then you pause, then you're inhaling into the chest so that you can also open up here on the rib cage. Then you pause again, and then you're inhaling all the way up to the top of your lungs. Top of your lungs are here. Your lungs are kind of like this whole space. And then you're exhaling all the air. So it looks like this. And you can either do this lying down or seated. Kind of like sipping the air. And you notice like it feels like, oh, I don't have any more space. And then like if you just wait a little bit, then you notice, oh, there's more space. It's like opening doorways. And that's a beautiful breath if you feel like really like you cannot sleep, you cannot fall asleep, to do at the end of a day in bed. Just do this like for a minute or 2. See, there you have your minute. You do that for a minute or 2, it will help you calm down so nicely. And then, I mean, what I also always love is like a sun salutation. I cannot really show you the whole sun salutation now, but like the Surya Namaskar, it's like it's a specific series of poses. And if you don't know anything, you can look it up on YouTube, but it's just such a cool practice because it gives you everything. It gives you strength, it gives you flexibility, it gives you mobility, it helps you with your breathing. And you can just do like 3 rounds on either side. And that maybe takes up like 7 minutes, 10 minutes, and you have a full practice. You have a full yoga practice, and you will feel so good. If you do this every morning, like it's just such a nice way to get your body back and like feeling mobile, feeling like there's like space again. And then the last part is also meditating, you know, really like taking time to just be. And whether this is a guided meditation or whether you feel like you just want to be mindful, or whether you do a body scan, it doesn't really matter, but taking that time to just guide your thoughts into a different direction than this everyday rumination. It's such a beautiful way to, again, help your brain to reset, help your thoughts to clean up, you know, and you will see like it just changes the way you think. It changes your perspectives. And you cannot expect this to happen all within 1 second. It takes time, but it takes time quickly. You know what I mean with that? There was like, you know, when I told you about the forward fold, people always think like, oh my God, like if I'm not flexible. There's no such thing. Yes, some people are more flexible and some people are less, but there's no such thing as you're just not flexible. It's just you didn't do it. And then once you start giving it time, you will see that actually the progress, it happens a lot faster than we often think. But it's also not linear. Progress is not linear. It's a bit back and forth and then changing levels. But it really helps with that acceptance of what is.
Christina, thank you so much for sharing your fascinating knowledge on yoga and neuropsychology with us today.
Thanks for having me.
It's so beautiful to see how passionate you are about this whole topic and your job. I can see why the Yoga Lab is such a popular place. I can only recommend, after speaking to Christina today, if you're feeling stressed or exhausted, or you're just looking for a chance to relax and come back to yourself, then do try and incorporate some yoga into your daily routine, even if it's just a minute, to increase your mindfulness, relieve stress, and also relax your mind. And definitely go pay the Yoga Lab a visit. From what I've seen, the classes are also organized into different categories, so you can choose if you'd like to energize, relax, or repair. And they also offer some online yoga classes. So follow them on Instagram, that's Christina's_yoga lab, or visit their website, yoga-lab.ch.
Thank you so much.